Under heavy fire, U.S. warships break through the Strait of Hormuz. Meanwhile, U.S. fighter jets carry out retaliatory strikes on Iran after previously stopping Iranian tankers by force. In addition, Iran still maintains its capabilities. The CIA believes Iran still has most of its missiles. All of this, and any other news regarding the negotiations, can be found here in this situation report on the Iran war.
Heiliger Stroh says you can now save the most at Holy with my code.
We'll start with Lebanon first. There are still attacks by Hezbollah on the Israelis and by the Israelis on Hezbollah. Israel has now recorded 3 killed from Hezbollah drones. That means, from their perspective, Hezbollah's drone attacks are still successful. Meanwhile, as Lorient Today reports here, Hezbollah is threatening to once again use attackers carrying explosives on their bodies or in a vehicle. And I'm sorry for this silly paraphrasing, but that's what the YouTube algorithm requires. There, you got to see it live. Of course, this puts pressure on the Israeli soldiers and makes harm to the civilian population more likely, since anyone approaching them could theoretically be an attacker. And this makes it more likely that Israeli soldiers will shoot earlier when they are confronted with civilians. So this can mean not only psychological stress for the soldiers, but also for numerous innocent people. And that's what happened. The commander of the Radwan units in Beirut was attacked during an Israeli assault. And this was the first attack on Beirut carried out by the Israelis since the beginning of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, there is some more information about the allies from the Persian Gulf. Here we have Sisi, the president of Egypt, in the United Arab Emirates. And there, we now have photographic evidence that the Egyptians have deployed Rafale fighter jets to the United Arab Emirates to help protect the Emirates. So Egypt has obviously participated in air defense in the past, or it has now sent them to help out going forward. Previously, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia had closed its airspace to the U.S. because of Project Freedom, and that was probably the main reason why Trump canceled it again after a very short time. Trump hadn't coordinated the operation with the allies at all, reports NBC News here. According to this, they were completely surprised by it. And of course, we have to keep in mind that if Trump forces the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, then we can expect fighting to flare up again. Or at least there's a possibility of that happening there. And maybe the nations that will be fired upon afterwards should know that. And when the Saudis found out about this, they immediately banned the Americans from using their airspace. In the meantime, however, it has been reported that Kuwait and Saudi Arabia have once again allowed the U.S. to use their airspace. So Project Freedom could theoretically start again. Meanwhile, the Iranian regime continues to be under pressure. Ghalibaf, who is the Speaker of Parliament, addresses the fact that the U.S. wants to force Iran to surrender using economic means. He is therefore preparing the population for increased economic pressure and urges them to persevere. At the same time, however, he also calls on the Basij to appear in public. The Basij are the militias that are part of the Revolutionary Guards, or are subordinate to them, and theoretically comprise hundreds of thousands of men. The tasks of the Basij are said to include reconstruction, but the Basij also serve to suppress protests, which could become relevant, because basically, both are a real concern. Both severe economic pressure and erupting protests. Here, we have an opposition media outlet that writes about this. Of course, it's also clear that the regime is aware of the danger and is trying to address it. But the fact is that the economic pressure and the suppression of the protests in January have led to serious problems in the country, and this continues to put pressure on the regime. The blockade is currently causing the problems to grow even further, and there is a threat of a shutdown of the oil wells. This means that the Iranians are being forced to shut down the oil wells, because they no longer have any space to store the oil. Right now, Iran is trying everything to delay that. For example, trucks carrying crude oil are supposed to cross the border into Pakistan. And of course, that's just a drop in the bucket. But every truck loaded with oil that leaves the country means that at least that amount of oil doesn't have to be stored locally anymore. And that delays the shutdown just a little bit more. And there, Iran is really trying on a broad front to prevent oil well shutdowns. at least for as long as possible. In this, Iran is also receiving help. For example, help has come from Iraq. The Iraqi oil minister, the deputy oil minister, was sanctioned here by the U.S. because he is said to have helped Iran avoid sanctions, according to the Americans, by mixing Iranian and Iraqi oil to disguise its origin. Ship-to-ship transfers are still taking place on the high seas, allowing Iran to sell oil this way and, of course, continue to gain revenue from it. In addition, the Washington Post reports that the CIA believes Iran could withstand a blockade for at least another 3 to 4 months, which is still quite a long time. Here we have another quote from it. Iran still has about 75% of its pre-war stock of mobile launchers and about 70% of its pre-war stock of missiles, a U.S. official stated. There are indications that the regime has managed to restore and put almost all of its underground storage facilities back into operation, to repair some damaged missiles and even assemble some new missiles that were almost completed at the start of the war. That means the claim that the Iranian missiles have practically already been defeated is obviously not true, if this information is correct. The problem is these are anonymous sources, but the Washington Post doesn't usually rely on people who feed it nonsense. Normally, it's part of journalistic practice, even with an anonymous source, to first check whether what they're saying is true. That means you verify the identity. Find out whether this person could actually know something relevant before passing it on. So if we want to believe that, Iran is still capable of carrying out significant attacks. And above all, of course, that also means that the reports claiming most of the missiles had already been destroyed, most of the launch vehicles had already been destroyed, are obviously not true, which means that the publicly known estimates of Iranian weapon stockpiles were obviously significantly wrong. Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, was reportedly furious about the attacks on the United Arab Emirates that took place on May 4th and 5th. That's what Iran International, an opposition media outlet here, reports. That's why he demanded to be allowed to meet with Mojtaba Khamenei. He apparently only met with Vahidi, only with the head of the Revolutionary Guards, as had been previously reported. The political side had no contact with Mojtaba at all. No personal contact. The meeting apparently did take place now. At least that's what Iranian state media are reporting. However, concrete consequences are not yet visible. But at least now, the president was now able to meet with the spiritual leader who is nominally supposed to make, or at least approve, all decisions. There are consequences not only for Iran and the USA, but also for all of us. Less because the US Navy is blocking our doorstep, but more if we don't eat well enough and have deficiencies in vitamins and minerals. Fortunately, today's sponsor can help with that. My alarm goes off every day at 4:30 a.m. so that I'm somewhat awake for European time. And most importantly, so I can finish my videos on time. For me personally, it's extremely important that I stay focused at work, that my immune system stays active, and that I get sick as little as possible. But of course, when it comes to digestion and energy, it's also really important that I feel good. I've been taking AG1 since 2024, and I've always said that I was never really sick. Now, I did have a bad cold once. No idea if that counts. Other than that, I'm really doing well, and I think it helps me with all these things. AG1 replaces 15 supplements that I no longer have to take. Clinical studies confirm the fast and efficient absorption of nutrients. It also increases the number of good gut bacteria and improves the nutrient spectrum. I took it for 3 months with the K2 and a nice metal lid, so it feels really high quality. I take 1 scoop of AG1. And then I personally always add K2 and D3, just 1 drop of each. Then just shake it all up and you can drink it. That's how every morning starts for me. The nice thing is, while it's good for me, it's not like it doesn't taste good. In fact, it actually tastes really delicious. If you also want to try AG1 and make sure that everything is really in order when it comes to bacteria, minerals, and good gut bacteria, there's now an offer. That's 5 AG1 daily servings for on the go, a bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2, and the welcome kit for only €69 free with the subscription. You can try all of this at www.drinkagon.com Militär and Geschichte mit Thorsten Heinrich. The subscription can be cancelled at any time. There is no minimum term. It can be paused at any time, and you have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So you take no risk at all. If you want to try it, give it a try. If you don't like it, if it doesn't convince you, if you don't like the taste, just send it back, and it won't cost you anything. Meanwhile, the U.S. reports that they have already prevented 52 ships from passing through the blockade. And keep in mind, this report is from May 6th. So by now, the number should be even higher. Because at the same time, the U.S. also reports that 70 tankers have already been prevented from taking on any assignments at all. So either from going to Iran or leaving Iran. The whole thing would hold up 166 million barrels of oil, which is worth more than 13 billion US dollars. However, not every ship can be stopped the same way. We have videos here where the Americans have published how they stopped ships by force. Here, there was gunfire from an FA-18 Hornet. That means one of the American fighter jets from an aircraft carrier obviously fired at the propulsion shafts, at the smokestack here, and elsewhere at the rudder of a ship, to stop it after it failed to comply with the requests to stop. Iran has also seized a ship in retaliation. And it is reported here that a Chinese tanker was hit in the Strait of Hormuz. That means the fighting, if you will, the attacks on civilian ships are continuing. Meanwhile, it is reported that 3 U.S. destroyers passed through the Strait of Hormuz and came under heavy fire. There was fire from drones, rockets, and fast boats. They were attacked from there. The U.S. then retaliated by attacking 2 Iranian ports to suppress the attacks. And at the same time, they probably also intended to retaliate for these attacks. Missile and drone launch sites were attacked in the process. And during these attacks, let me see, I have it here somewhere. This should be it. Missile and drone launch sites were attacked, as well as command centers, surveillance, and reconnaissance facilities. And Iran, meanwhile, says, we have here Press TV, which is Iran's English-language propaganda outlet. He says, this demonstrates that, according to Iranian rules, only those who follow them are allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. In plain English, anyone who doesn't comply will be fired upon. And we're even daring to do this with U.S. warships, as we've just demonstrated. Meanwhile, Mer News is providing a slightly different version. They say the U.S. initially attacked the ships we've already talked about. These are the seized tankers, or rather, the tankers that were stopped by force because of the blockade. And then they attacked ports and residential areas. Iran then responded by attacking the U.S. ships. That means Iran is pretending or stating that the U.S. warships were attacked in response to the attacks. The attacks that hit Iran, where the Americans say they fought against Iranian offensive assets. Meanwhile, when it comes to diplomacy, the question is, of course, how things will proceed. Israel believes that for the moment, it's already over again. As for the exchange of fire, so to speak, regarding the fighting between Iran and the USA, the clashes happened because Iran wants to enforce its control over the Strait of Hormuz. That was basically the reason, and by firing at U.S. warships, they are demonstrating their willingness to act, which of course is also noticed by the other nations. That means it must be expected that Iran may fire on both civilian and military ships. Because logically, if Iran dares to attack the U.S., it certainly won't stop short of attacking a Kuwaiti ship if it doesn't have permission. If Iran manages to establish its Persian Gulf Strait Authority, as Iran called it, it will have control over the Strait of Hormuz. Then Iran will have significant additional financial resources and at the same time be able to put pressure on the Gulf states to distance themselves from the U.S. Both sides are currently far apart in terms of their negotiating positions, with almost nothing but U.S. concessions visible so far. Most drafts actually include Iranian enrichment before the start of the war. And during the fighting, it was repeatedly said that the Iranians would have to completely give up uranium enrichment. It is now being said that it would be limited in quantity and concentration. There should be a prior moratorium, meaning Iran would be prohibited from enriching at all during that time. But of course, that allows Iran to maintain its infrastructure. And thus, at any time, if the US is distracted, or if there is another US administration that wants to ignore it, it allows Iran to resume enrichment toward a bomb whenever it wants. The fate of the highly enriched uranium also remains unresolved. It is still unclear whether Iran really wants to hand it over to a third country or dilute it. That is repeatedly rumored, but nothing has been proven yet. And that would be more or less the only concession that can be observed from the Iranian side. That they might possibly be willing to remove the highly enriched uranium from their own control. But even there are still repeated statements that this would be unacceptable. The Atlantic writes the obvious about this, which we've already discussed several times here on the channel. Trump wants to end the war, while Iran believes it can hold out. That means the negotiating position is very much to the disadvantage of the USA. And a quote from the article, "But Iran doesn't seem to have any interest in ending the war, or at least not with a result that would be acceptable to the American negotiators." Trump is now in a dilemma. The president, 5 advisors and external experts tell me, is convinced that he can sell any kind of agreement as a success. But at least for now, the author of The Art of the Deal can't even get Iran to the negotiating table. Today, Washington is still waiting for Iran to respond to the latest offer, a unilateral memorandum of understanding that is much more an extension of the ceasefire than a treaty to end the conflict. However, Trump believes that he can sell any agreement, no matter what kind, as a victory, while the Iranians are not even negotiating with him. That's the point of the current situation. Trump wants out at any cost. And then there are further comments like this one. Suppose Iran agrees to fulfill what was agreed upon, which might be a bold assumption. Then the already legendary Epic Fury will come to an end, and the extremely effective blockade will ensure that the Strait of Hormuz is open to everyone, even for Iran. If you don't agree to this, the bombings will begin, and unfortunately, these will reach a much greater scale and intensity than before. Of course, you have to ask yourself, what use are such posts then? Because every 2 days, he declares that they're ready to strike really, really hard. But the fact is that the Iranians obviously aren't impressed by this, and currently aren't even at the negotiating table. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Justice is looking into what's going on with the bets on oil prices. Here, 4 cases are mentioned where traders supposedly placed $2.6 billion in bets on oil prices and made huge profits. It says here that they won $2.6 billion. I think that's a mistake. I believe they're just adding up the amounts, because the 4 examples mentioned were the 23rd. March 23rd, 15 minutes before Trump announced that he would postpone the threatened attacks on the Iranian power grid. Traders bet more than $500 million that oil prices would fall. On the 7th, April, just a few hours before the temporary ceasefire announced by Trump, traders bet $960 million that oil prices would fall. On the 17th, April, 20 minutes before Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi announced on social media that the Strait of Hormuz was open, traders bet $760 million that oil prices would fall. And on the 21st, April, 15 minutes before Trump announced the extension of the ceasefire, traders placed a series of bets worth $430 million that oil prices would fall. We've seen events like this on this channel before. Those definitely weren't just those 4 bets where someone placed corresponding bets minutes before major events were announced, and in doing so, really created wealth, made profits that will last for generations. Let's come to a conclusion. The American counterattacks on the Iranian facilities made sense, and at least in terms of scale, they were probably powerful enough not just to be for show. Although there is still no battle damage assessment, meaning no evaluation of the damage is available yet. So whether anything was actually hit and destroyed, there is still unclear at this point. But on the one hand, this signaled that they are actually capable of fighting if necessary. But they also tried to avoid an escalation, and thus, of course, signaled that they really want peace, but not at any price. Because both passing through and fighting the attackers could have led to further escalation. But fundamentally, the current problem remains that Trump wants to end the war more than Iran does. If one of the 2 sides in a negotiation is under pressure to act, but the other is not, then the side under pressure is in a much worse negotiating position. And right now, that's the US side. The US, Trump wants to end this war, and he makes that abundantly clear every 2 days. Really, every day. And the threats that he keeps making all the time now seem more like a sign of weakness than a sign of strength. And that's understood in Iran, which according to the CIA can probably hold out for 3 to 4 months. And if Trump is not willing to do that, and if dissatisfaction with the situation on the home front is great enough, then he might actually not be able to do it. So if Trump is not willing to hold out for 3 to 4 months, then Iran will come out of this agreement with very positive results, no matter how the war ends. That's the current situation, at least. That's how it looks right now. If you enjoyed the situation report, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you have anything to add. And tomorrow at 8 p.m. German time, we have a situation report on the Ukraine war and the Persian Gulf, followed by a Q&A session. All as a live stream, so you can ask your questions directly. It would be great to see you there as well. That's all from me for now. Thank you for your attention, and see you soon. At this point, I would also like to give my special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamouri, as well as Lieutenant Jans vom Eck, Uwe de Vran, nicknamed Tabib, Karsten Schultz, Robert Veal, Vision, Soundlab, Lick Chatter, NTX, Malermeister Noggle, Marcus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Best, Zick Rider 666, Mota 1000 Janis Gu, Sasha Muller, Cunningham, and Eustress. Thank you very much. Without you, this would not be possible.